Thank you for presenting today, Travis.
Of course. I want to make sure that the right screen is showing there. Is that the
your full screen with
title
your
slide?
Yes.
Okay. You practice, and when it comes down to the show time. So thank you for the introduction. This week, actually coming next week, is the 7th annual Infrastructure Week. It starts on Monday, May 13th. It goes through the 20th. Hopefully today's presentation will arm you with some knowledge about infrastructure in the U.S. and Texas. It provides an opportunity for everybody America's businesses, workers, citizens, and elected leaders to focus around one message. America's future will be shaped by the infrastructure choices we make today. So we invite you to join the 500 affiliate organizations, companies, and cities hosting events nationwide, participating in press and on social media, and leading the fight to rebuild and modernize America's infrastructure. Just a quick quote from me, because I've been told that my opinions are quite strong about infrastructure, and these reflect my passion for infrastructure. These aren't necessarily the views of ASCE or my employer, just so you keep that in mind when we go through these slides. So infrastructure creates jobs. They create 141,000 additional jobs in Texas by 2028. So I want you to visit infrastructureweek.org, access resources such as templates for opinion pieces, social media shareables. You can get ideas from last year's highlights, and then tell us what action you plan to take during Infrastructure Week using the hashtag #BuildForTomorrow. That way it all gets conglomerated into one piece. So an overview of the 2017 Infrastructure Report Card for the U.S. ASCE puts this card out every 4 years, and it uses a simple A to F grading scale. That way everybody from all walks of life can understand it. If you walked home to your parents with a C- in school, you would understand how bad the infrastructure would be if it got the same grade. So each category on the report card is evaluated by ASCE staff and the Committee for America's Infrastructure. I've been a member of that now for a year, and I will continue on my role for next year as we gear up for the 2021 report card release. So each of these categories for infrastructure are evaluated with capacity, funding, public safety, condition, future need, resiliency, O&M, and innovation. And so when the card came out in 2017, the years evaluated was 2012 to 2016. And this is a snapshot in time. So infrastructure from 2012 to 2016 was graded on how well in each of these categories it was performing. The 2017 grades, some of them had raised from 2013, some of them went down, and some of them stayed the same. But overall, America's infrastructure grade is a D+. The number of years that ASCE has rolled out this report card, the grade has not been above a D. In addition to the National Infrastructure Report Card, about half the states have state infrastructure report cards. The state report cards are prepared by committees of volunteer civil engineers across the U.S. on the same rolling basis about every 4 years. Just as in the National Report Card, State Reports Card grades the categories of the infrastructure present in the state, as well as give the overall grade and recommendations to improve. The 2017 Report Card for Texas infrastructure, data was gathered from multiple agencies. It wasn't just a single agency skewing a grade one direction or the other. Some of this data was publicly available. Some of this data was requested and shared, knowing that it was a confidential data set. The grades were put together we did a partial release in 2017. We did not grade every category, but you compare the grades to the previous infrastructure report card to see how well infrastructure is doing. A drastic change in grade, such as the aviation grade you see there from a C+ to a B-, requires that the entire committee meet and collaborates on why. All the grades in the report card need to be, the facts need to be represented by the report card. For instance, in the flooding category, where it's a D, and had Hurricane Harvey not had such devastating flooding, that grade would have looked weird. And finally, ASCE Global gets to review the report card because the infrastructure report card is trademarked. The Committee on American Infrastructure reviews each report card for about a period of 30 days before it goes to the public. So now let's compare the grades across Texas and compare them to the national grades. So in aviation, national grade is a D, and Texas is a B-. There's large airports requiring large infrastructure and small airports requiring large infrastructure still. The reason the grade is so drastically different here is Texas invests a lot into their airport infrastructure. The U.S. airport system serves more than 2 million passengers every day, and that's just going to be growing year by year. There's a $42 billion funding gap that's been created between 2016 and 2025. So like I said, the U.S. serves a lot of passengers. That number is just going to continue to go up to over 1 billion passengers by 2035. To service these passengers, the FAA is preparing and working to implement NextGen, which is going to modernize the outdated U.S. air traffic system. It includes 8 specific programs to improve weather interpretation, air traffic management, data collection, system integration, and information exchange. It's going to use GPS to calculate weather delays, takeoff and taxi delays, and improves the safety as you fly through the air. If you've noticed recently, maybe within the past 5 years, planes fly a lot closer. They can fly up to 1,000 feet apart from each other now using this NextGen technology. NextGen has already modernized over 5 million square miles of the domestic airspace, 24 million square miles of oceanic airspace, will be completely implemented by 2025 and will generate $38 billion in savings. So I anticipate that this grade may be going up as NextGen is fully implemented. So why is it important to invest in this airport infrastructure, aviation infrastructure? Well, in 2016, 81% of the flights were on time, which isn't bad. The top 5 busiest airports in the U.S. are Atlanta, LAX, Chicago, DFW, and Denver. If you shut down one of these 5 airports for more than 4 hours, it can result in a ripple effect in the United States economy of upwards of 75 cents per dollar being lost productivity costs over the next 5 to 7 business days. That's a pretty significant ripple effect. Bridges. There are over 600,000 bridges in the U.S., about 53,000 of those in Texas, and almost 4 in 10 of those, so 40%, are 50 years or older. You've got new bridges, you've got old bridges, you've got bridges that still function as the old bridges, and finally city and county bridges. 9.1 of the nation's bridges are structurally deficient. In Texas, that number is 1.7%. So that's the significant difference in grades right there, the number of structurally deficient bridges. The most recent estimate puts the nation's backlog of bridge rehabilitation at $123 billion. So what does structurally deficient mean? It doesn't necessarily mean the bridge is going to collapse, but it may have a load carrying capacity. Because of that load carrying capacity, it may be closed. If it's frequently overtopped during flooding and it creates severe traffic delays, it's structurally deficient. Or if it requires immediate rehabilitation to remain open. Top 5 and bottom 5 structurally deficient bridges by state. When you look at the District of Columbia with only 9, that's pretty good, but then you realize that that's a very small area. So it's better to look at percentages on both these slides. Texas is pushing along. I think on the next report card, we may get news that we have beat Nevada as far as number of structurally deficient bridges, which would move us up into the top spot. If you live on the East Coast and Rhode Island, you may be more suspect of your bridges being structurally deficient, and looks like Rhode Island DOT needs to get to work on them. On dams, both the national grade and the Texas grade is a D. Dams are very vital Dams are very vital to protecting our communities and also for water supply. There's over 90,000 dams in the country, and the average age is 56 years. And now as our population grows, the overall number of high hazard dams is increasing. Dams used to be put out in the middle of the country, but now the cities build in around them. There's over 15,000 high hazard dams in the United States. It's estimated that it will require an initial investment of nearly $45 billion to repair aging, critical, high hazard potential dams. Nice dams, big concrete dams, small earthen dams, and dams that give you a little bit worry when they look like this. This is Lake Louisville above Dallas about a year ago. That has been repaired since. So I mentioned high hazard dams. Like I said, all dams don't start as high hazard. They could start as a low hazard dam. But what happens when the cities build around them is they get reclassified, which in turn makes increased requirements for the dam owners and a higher cost to improve and maintain, and an increased risk to the public if something were to happen to that dam. Only 3 states in the U.S. have laws requiring the consideration of hazard creep when zoning and planning around dams. Those 3, California, Wisconsin, and Virginia. The interesting thing about this slide, the U.S. dam failures, where the number of failures exceed 250, the only state that shows up on there is California that's done anything about it. You see the other states, they're not considering hazard creep in their zoning and planning activities. An important part of the dam grading is if the dams have an emergency action plan. Part of that emergency action plan is the dam inundation zone maps. These are generally not available to the public, so these get kept by the dam owners. But this is if the dam were to breach, what would happen downstream. So it's important for the training of first responders. You prepare these with the technical support from the engineering community. It provides for regional coordination. I did a dam breach mapping one time in the panhandle of Texas. The mapping stopped east of Oklahoma City. So all across the state of Oklahoma, every agency had to have a phone number of who to call if there were an emergency. They need to know when the water's going to get there, who needs to be evacuated. That's what the emergency action plan is for. And while GIS matters, I found, especially in the Oklahoma case, that Sheriff Bob does not have access to a GIS, and he wants a paper map of where he needs to go, where he needs to close bridges and things like that. Drinking water, in Texas it's a D+, and nationwide it's a D. There's over 1 million miles of pipes in the US, and most of them were laid in the mid-20th century with a lifespan of 75 to 100 years. So we can see that that lifespan is quickly coming to a close. The quality of drinking water in the United States remains high, but the legacy and emerging contaminants continue to require close attention. The American Water Works Association estimates $1 trillion is necessary to maintain and expand service to meet demands over the next 25 years. And note that, maintain and expand. That doesn't have, that $1 trillion figure doesn't include rehabilitation. So usually when you see this on the ground and it hasn't been raining in a while, you excavate it and you get this. So between 10 and 30% of the treated water is lost or not billable to the consumer. There's an estimated 240,000 water main breaks per year in the United States that result in 2 trillion gallons of treated water being wasted. That's treated water that's been paid for but cannot be sold to the public. 2 trillion gallons, that's a number that I couldn't put my head around. I was trying to think of how much space would 2 trillion gallons of water take up. So the biggest thing I could think of is in Arlington, Texas, the AT&T Stadium, which has an internal volume of 104 million cubic feet. So if we wanted to put 2 trillion gallons of water in this, how many times would it fill up? Just over 2,500. That's a lot of wasted treated water. The 2017 Texas report card did not grade the energy, but in 2012 it was a B+, and nationwide it's a D+. Generally, why Texas's grade is so high is because Texas has its own electric grid for the most part, and is not subject to large widespread blackouts such as the Northeast blackout of 2003. Most of the infrastructure was placed in the 1950s and 60s with a 50-year life expectancy. And most of the power grids outside of Texas are at full capacity. That's why that grade sits at a D+. Flood control is a Texas unique category. This is 2015 in Dallas. This is 2017 in Wimberley. These were both what was considered 100-year floods. Now, when I say 100-year floods, that's actually a misleading definition. So the 100-year flood, that's the 1% chance each year of experiencing a certain size flood. This is what you see on the FEMA flood insurance rate maps. If you take that over a 30-year mortgage, your actual chance of flooding is about 1 in 4. Now the 500-year flood, the 0.2% chance flood, is rarely shown on FEMA maps. And if you take that over a period of a 30-year mortgage, your chance of flooding is about 6%. The reason these are misleading definitions is because Houston had 3 500-year flood events in successive years: Memorial Day 2015, Tax Day 2016, and Harvey in 2017. The Austin area had 100-year floods in 2013 and 2015. Lake Louisville was at its 100-year mark in 2015 and Lake Grapevine in 2014. So just saying that it's a 100-year flood is misleading because the general public thinks, great, I'm safe for another 100 years. Hazardous waste was last graded by the Texas section in 2008. Nationally, it's a D+. That grade has gone up largely in due to recycling and reuse rather than disposal, but it still remains at a D+ because there are still over 18,000 sites and 22 million acres of land that are related to hazardous waste programs. Inland waterways, that wasn't evaluated by the Texas section throughout its history of doing report cards, but nationwide it's a D, and that grade is rising. If you look at a National Weather Service flood map or warnings map right now, you'll see that most of the inland waterways are under flood warning. We've had a tremendous amount of rain in the Midwest this year. I think almost the entire stretch of the Mississippi is under some type of flood warning. There's about 25,000 miles of inland waterways and 239 locks. We refer to this as the water highway. It's operated and maintained by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and delivers more than 600 million tons of cargo, which is about 14% of all domestic freight. Most of the locks were designed for 50 years and are well past their design life, and nearly half of all vessels experience some type of delay. There's 30,000 documented miles of levees in the U.S. The Texas section has never evaluated it, and nationwide they get a D. There's an estimated $1.3 trillion of property protected by this levee system, and an estimated $80 billion is needed over the next 10 years. In 2014, Congress passed the Water Resources Reform and Development Act, which expanded the levee safety program nationwide. As of this presentation in 2017, it had not been funded, but now it has been funded. Ports, there are 926 ports in the U.S. 99% of all trade passes through these ports. Texas evaluated them in 2012 with a grade of C, and nationwide it's C+. The ships are getting bigger. Panama Canal has expanded. They call them Panamax ships now. Ports are having to deepen their channels and raise bridges. So I anticipate these grades going up. Texas ports, as I said before, 99% of all tonnage comes through ports. Texas handles 22% of that. Now, the Port of Corpus Christi is the only port in the United States where a container from a ship can get onto the U.S. interstate system without first going through a stoplight. It's pretty unique. It's the only port in the U.S. that you can do that. Also, they're constructing a new harbor bridge, which will be able to receive the new post-Panamax ships. Last year, in 2018, the United States Army Corps of Engineers announced they will be dredging Port Mansfield, which is in South Texas, and this will create a brand new port for Texas, driving that 22% number upwards. Parks and Recreation. It's a statistic that I was proud to see because I'm a supporter of parks, that 7 out of 10 Americans use the park system on a regular basis, resulting in 7 billion outdoor recreational outings. Parks have never been evaluated by the Texas section, but nationwide they have a D+. So in Texas, the open lands of the state are managed by the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department. Funding for the Parks Department is subject to the 2-year budget cycle as dictated by the Texas legislature, which has created a $780 million backlog in the state's 91 parks. Additionally, lands have been dedicated to the state for parks, but remain closed due to lack of infrastructure or funding for staff. Full funding from a dedicated tax on sporting goods would be a good start in Texas. By law, state parks are supposed to receive 94% of the tax revenues from the sale of items such as baseball bats and fishing poles. But only once since that law passed in 1993 has the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department received their full share. So in other words, they've been shorted tens of millions of dollars in every latest legislative session since 1993. To balance the state budget, legislators continually raid the sporting goods tax fund, robbing Peter to pay Paul. A simple fix would be to give the voters the option of amending the Texas Constitution to specify that Texas Parks and Wildlife get its full 94% share. That proposal has yet to gain traction in the legislature. While the state parks $780 million deferred maintenance price tag is relatively small compared to the $11.6 billion price tag in the National Park Service, Teddy Roosevelt's championing of national parks was a great 20th century idea, but we risk losing those by not funding them properly. Rail. Rail has a very high grade in the National Infrastructure Report Card, a B, and has never been evaluated by the Texas section. The primary reason for the high grade of a B is that significant private investment goes into the rail network. The rail network carries approximately 1/3 of U.S. exports and delivers 5 million tons of freight and 85,000 passengers per day. $27.1 billion of private money was invested into the rail network in 2015. But it's important to remember that no passenger rail in the world is profitable without government subsidies. The LA Metro receives 72 cents per passenger per ticket, plus an additional $2.50 of government subsidies. In Texas, the Texas Central is a private company bringing a project to Texas that is unlike any other high-speed rail project. It is backed by private investors and not public funds. They're developing a high-speed passenger rail system that will connect Dallas to Houston using world-class technology and will provide travel time of less than 90 minutes. For highways and roads, both grades, Texas and the national grade, is a D. The interstate system, the local highway system, both contribute to that grade. The DOTs, Department of Transportations, were formed to build the Eisenhower interstate system, and in large part this is done. But it's important to remember that 90% of the country is not served by this system. Only 26% of all roadway miles are on system, part of the state highway system. The rest remain responsibilities of cities and counties. The annual cost of maintenance and repair of vehicles by damaged roadways equates to a hidden tax on consumers. That tax is not reinvested into the infrastructure that is creating the problem. This map shows the average annual delay per auto commuter. The red states obviously outnumber the green states. The thing I like about this slide the most is Wyoming. The population of antelope in Wyoming outnumbers the population of people. So I'm wondering if this is a delay caused by antelope, the 1 hour delay, or if something else is contributing to that. But if you want a slow or fast auto commute, you need to go to Wyoming. So how do we solve this? Well, so far the answer has been fuel taxes, but this is touchy. The shift to more electric and fuel-efficient vehicles is rendering that standard fuel tax obsolete. The federal gas tax and diesel taxes haven't been raised since 1993, and they're not indexed to inflation. So if you haven't had a pay raise since 1993, you are in the same boat as the federal fuel tax. States are not waiting for the federal government to tackle this fuel tax issue. 27 have increased their revenue for transportation infrastructure since 2013 using a fuel tax. In Texas, 25% of the gas tax, so 5 cents for every 20 cents per gallon, is diverted to other budgetary items. The legislature likes to move money out of one place to the other to balance the budget, and this puts TxDOT in quite a pinch. There are alternatives to a fuel tax: vehicle lease fees, ad valorem taxes or property taxes, an auto parts tax that goes to a dedicated transportation fund, and you would have to make sure that you put wording in that so it doesn't end up like the parks funding where it gets siphoned off elsewhere. You can do taxes on auto insurance that the consumer wouldn't see, but the auto insurance companies could funnel those into transportation funds. Bicycle registration fees, electric vehicle fees, rental car fees, a slightly controversial vehicle miles traveled fee. This is an alternative to motor fuel taxes. You would report your miles on your income tax form and pay the appropriate tax then. This is going to probably be more prevalent coming across the US. There's already a pilot program in Oregon that seems to be working out well for them, because as cars get more fuel efficient, those taxes are going to decline over time. You can also do general fund revenues. That's how cities and counties put money into the roads. And finally, you could do a straight sales tax allocation. For instance, here in Hazlet, we have a half-cent roadway improvement sales tax. So 1/2 cent of our 2 cents that we get for sales tax goes into a roadway improvement fund. Schools is another very touchy issue. Texas graded them a D- in 2012, D+ nationwide. There's over 50 million students and 6 million teachers and adults that occupy 100,000 public school buildings in the US. There's still, while state and local governments make significant investment into those schools, there's still a $38 billion annual gap of funding. So across the US, 24% of public school buildings were rated as being in fair or poor, yet occupied condition. Texas school funding is super touchy because each legislative session begins with nearly the same quotes. Robin Hood financing is convoluted. We ought to just start with a brand new system. Anyone that can propose such a system that can weave through the 20+ years of Band-Aids we have put on the issue can gladly take my job. Solid waste got a B+ in 2012 and a C+ nationwide, and that's going down. The reason is our recycling programs, which were on the way up from reducing the landfill, are starting to suffer. Overall, the solid waste condition is fair, but there's still 250 million tons of waste that is deposited in landfills. We need to recognize that what is routinely discarded may in fact be a reusable resource. So why is recycling going down in the US? Well, the US has a new recycling program. For years and years, the U.S. has been told, you need to recycle. We're going to take your recycling, we're going to turn it into something else. What we didn't know was that recycling was actually being sold by the waste management companies overseas to make a profit. But in 2018, as a response to U.S. tariffs, China upended the recycling industry when it stopped accepting much of the scrap material that America had been shipping there. Now, it was really cheap for the recycling collectors to send this scrap to China because there were container ships coming over here full and going back empty. They figured out by sending them back full, it would be a way to make money. Now, new buyers in Malaysia, India, and other markets have emerged, but there are way fewer ships that make direct trips there from the U.S. So global prices for used materials have plummeted. Companies are losing money on most of the recycled scrap that it now sells overseas. The companies are either passing that cost along to the U.S. households, or some smaller cities and towns have decided they don't want to pass that cost on to their citizens, and they've just simply decided their recycling services are too expensive and they're ending them. Transit nationwide is a D-, and in Texas was rated a C+. The primary reason for that is that if you look on that map there, you'll see that across the southern and midwestern U.S., there's just not a lot of good public transportation in the top 10. Nonetheless, transit in America carries 10.5 billion people per year. The cities that are in the top 10 are adding lines. Cities in the South and the Midwest tend to be a little bit more spread out, so I'm not sure where public transit fits in there. But with the existing infrastructure, there's still a $90 billion rehabilitation backlog. Wastewater, a D for Texas, a D+ for the nation. There's over 14,000 wastewater treatment plants in the U.S. They protect the public health and the environment. There's $271 billion needed to meet the current and future demands, and new methods and technologies such as biogas plants, now numbering over 1,200, is why the nationwide grade raised to a D+. So the leading cause of freshwater impairment is the unauthorized or untreated wastewater discharges. In Texas, 37% of river miles, 43% of reservoir acres are designated by TCEQ as having impaired water quality. EPA says 55% of the nation's waters are impaired. Wastewater sewers are routinely subject to stormwater flooding overflows, which produces a large influx of water to the treatment plant, overtaxing the infrastructure and causing those unauthorized, untreated wastewater discharges. So we've gone through the 16 categories. The grade nationwide is a D+, the grade in Texas is a C-. And I know I've said a lot of things statistic-wise, but each one of them comes down to how do we get it fixed? Most of them say money. So you may be sitting there wondering, I don't have money, the state legislature doesn't have money, the nation is just now starting to talk about infrastructure. What could I do as an individual? So I've prepared a couple individual solutions for you. First one is, know your local council person or alderman or mayor. Helps to know a county judge sometimes too. Because the old adage of think local, act global really should be think local, act local. Your day-to-day lives are more affected by your local council person than anyone in Austin or Washington. You might ask why your street is filled with potholes. Because somebody on the other block screamed louder. Why does your water taste funny? Well, during the budget session, the water department said they could still pass a quality test without that chemical. Who decided that your neighborhood didn't need a sidewalk to the school? Well, sorry, that money was spent on Christmas decorations or a fireworks show. All city budgets, all county budgets are open records. They're subject to open record requests. They're set in September. In October, they are adopted, and most of them are published online. You need to look over them and judge them, and tell your council person if you disagree. Make them tell you why it is that way. Most importantly, this goes for any politician, remind them that you vote. A politician told me one time, the most powerful thing you can say to me is, I vote, and I am very influential among my friends. Second individual solution is have a plan. In case of a bridge collapse or a water main break, have a plan in case something happens. Know other ways to get out or get home. The major reason the city of Houston did not evacuate for Hurricane Harvey is they believed I-45 would be so jammed that the storm would hit while cars were stuck in traffic. The reason they thought this was because that's exactly what happened during Hurricane Rita. The average time for someone evacuating from Houston to Dallas during Hurricane Rita was between 14 and 24 hours. And I personally know friends that did it in 6 hours by taking side roads through College Station and Waco. Had the city of Houston decided to evacuate, we'll never know if Waze would have taken over and gotten people routed around that traffic. And finally, this is taken from the Department of Homeland Security, but it also applies to infrastructure. If you see something wrong, say something to someone. Larger cities have non-emergency call numbers such as 211 and 411. Smaller cities have someone that will always answer the phone. If there's an inlet clogged, a tree that has fallen by or on a bridge, the water smells funny or you suddenly lose pressure, maybe you see some unusual erosion on a dam or a stream that's left its banks, and it's never left its banks before. Say something so someone knows about it. So opportunity exists now to make good on these recommendations to solve our nation's and Texas's infrastructure crisis. Just last week, the Trump administration and the U.S. Congress came together to weigh infrastructure legislation and reported a $2 trillion investment. Now is the time where we can get involved and take action on this investment. The government and the private sector must partner to close our infrastructure deficit, commit to a future in which we improve infrastructure and value it as a quality of life for our economic prosperity. Each day we delay escalates the shared costs, jeopardizes our health, risks, and our security, and this is an option our country and our state can no longer afford. All Americans and all Texans share a role in renewing the infrastructure around us, beginning with learning about it and appreciating the infrastructure around them. Share this report card, advocate for long-term investment, and thoroughly prepare for the future. There is an app called Save America's Infrastructure. The national grades are in this app as long as the state grades. Additionally, in this app, you can find the full report card and the facts that go along with each category. So in closing, this was a review of the major infrastructure issues in the nation and the state that need attention. We did the research for you. We put it in the report card. We urge you to get the message out, especially during Infrastructure Week. As civil engineers, this is what we signed up to do. We need to bring these issues to our mayor's office, to the city council, to the Texas legislature, to the governor, to our senators, to the president. The infrastructure of this nation and Texas affects us all. It's our duty to make sure it functions the way we want it to. Thank you for tuning in today. And if you are interested in volunteering for the 2021 update, which we will start very soon, please contact the Government Affairs Committee at governmentaffairs@texasasce.org.
Thank you, Travis. Does anyone have any questions? I think everybody is muted, so you just have to type them in your chat bar.
Well, I guess I did such a good job explaining infrastructure.
That's what I was fixing to say. Well, I guess you did a great job then. Well, if you don't have any questions, then